Welcome to my draft guide for Lost Caverns of Ixalan. The set just finished being revealed today, and I think it is going to be a refreshing change of pace when compared to some of the previous sets. I also just wanted to mention that I just qualified for YouTube Partner, so thank you all so much for the support. I really appreciate it. And by clicking like, subscribe, and leaving a comment, you help me bring my content to more people. And now you have the option to also click join. And I've put in some perks that you might be interested in checking out. And you have the opportunity to become one of my first YouTube members. So thank you again for the support. I really, really appreciate it. And so in this episode, I'm going to be covering the set's mechanics, the top commons, the archetypes' general themes, and a little bit more. And then tomorrow also I will be posting my full set review. So if you want to sit down for a couple of hours, I don't usually post it. Usually it's something I just keep on Twitch. But I thought maybe you'd like to see it on YouTube. So we'll see how it goes. And with that, let's get started. So the first new mechanic is called Craft. And Craft is an activated ability that requires three things. First, you have to exile the permanent that is required for craft. So for this one, craft with an artifact, you'd have to exile an artifact. So you're exiling some sort of specified material and then paying the associated mana cost. And notably, the materials, such as Artifact for Idol of the Deep King, can come from in play or from the graveyard. And then when you craft, the card is exiled and returns to play transformed as a new card. As the craft ability resolves, it returns to the battlefield transformed under your control. So keep in mind that if you do exile tokens, they can be used to pay the price, but be careful because sometimes the crafted card will refer to the exiled cards used to craft, and the tokens cease to exist once exiled. Another mechanic that we've seen before is double-faced cards that are one thing on one side and then have some sort of activation or requirement for them to flip. They don't exile, so when these cards transform, they don't leave the battlefield. So if a card is tapped before it transforms, it will still be tapped once it's flipped. And cards that transform into lands don't count as playing a land for the turn, so they can be a really good way to ramp. And when a double-faced card isn't on the battlefield, it only has its characteristics of its front face. So a card that looks to grab a land from your deck won't be able to grab Itlimoc, Cradle of the Sun, but a card that tutors for an enchantment could grab the front side, Growing Rights of Itlimoc. So also, when the back face is up, you'll use the front face's mana cost to determine the back face's mana value. 3, for example, for Itlimoc, Cradle of the Sun. And then we've got Brood Rage, Mycoid, that gives us the third mechanic, shows us the third mechanic, which is Descended. Several cards have abilities that check if you've descended, and you've descended if a permanent card has been put into your graveyard from anywhere. So it's important to note permanent card because tokens won't count. And some cards count how many times this has occurred in a single turn as well. And then we've got Descend, Descend 4, and Descend 8, and Fathomless Descent. So these care about how many permanent cards are in your graveyard, including lands, so just not instances and sorceries. Descend 4 and Descend 8 abilities care about there being at least 4 or 8 permanents in your graveyard. They don't all have to come from one turn like Descended. The Fathomless Descent has no limit and just gets better the higher the number gets. So it's kind of like a Descend X. And then we have another new mechanic, which is called Discover. And Discover comes with a number, well, I'll just Discover X. And Discover exiles cards from your library, one at a time, until you exile a non-land card with X mana value or less. You can then either cast it without paying its mana cost or put it into your hand. So it's sort of like Cascade, but you don't have to play the card if you don't want to. And then all the other exiled cards that were revealed or whatever are then put on the bottom of your library in a random order. And so with the same thing with Discover that we saw with Cascade is it kind of depends on how you've built your deck. And there's a little bit of a randomness to it, right? The more that you can hit a 3-cost card on a Discover 3 is going to be better. And it kind of encourages you to not put as many 1-drops or maybe not even as many 2-drops as you normally would in a curve. So I'm really excited to see how this mechanic plays out. And then another returning mechanic that we've got is Explore. When a creature explores, you reveal the top card of your library. If it is a land, you put it into your hand. If it isn't a land, you put a +1/+1 counter on the creature that explored. And then you can put the non-land card that was revealed into your graveyard or leave it on top of your library. And so this one is... this was another one that's going to be kind of interesting to play because it helps you smooth out your draws and help you find your land, as well as giving you the option of just making the creature into a larger, making this flyer into a 2/2 instead, right? But it's kind of, you don't really have control over what is revealed on the top card of your library unless you have some way of changing what's on top of your library. So another interesting mechanic. And one of the prevalent ways to explore in this set is through map tokens. And map tokens are colorless artifact tokens with the ability, 1 colorless, tap, sacrifice this artifact, target creature you control explores, activate only as a sorcery. So a couple creatures explore because of an activated or triggered ability that doesn't target the creature. So as long as the spell or ability resolves, the creature can explore even if it's no longer on the battlefield, which is kind of an interesting one. So if you're sacrificing a map token and targeting a creature, and that creature is killed, then the map token doesn't have a valid target and it fizzles, right? But afterwards, after the explore is already happening, if you were to kill the creature, it wouldn't stop the Explorer, it would just stop the +1/+1 counter from going on the creature. And then the last mechanic isn't really a mechanic, but more of a name for something that already existed. And this one is when a creature is brought back from the graveyard for another chance at life, it is often exiled when it dies a second time to prevent it from looping. And they've decided to call this a Finality Counter. And so that's it for the mechanics, and now I'd like to present some of the top commons that really stood out to me in each of the colors. So for white, my standout common is Iron Paw Aspirant. They've gone and made a 2/3 for 2 at common, which there's a lot of Grizzly Bears, there's a lot of 2/2s for 2 in the set. And so then you throw in a 2/3 at common, and you're kind of like, why did they do this? And white is looking like one of the deepest colors. It had 7 commons that caught my attention and 6 uncommons, and it has lots of artifact synergies for crafting. For blue, we got Out of Air, which is a counterspell for 2 double pip blue, and it costs 2 less to cast if it targets a creature spell, and otherwise it just is a 4-cost counter target spell. So it will be interesting to see if this plays out well, since you kind of have like an old school counter spell for creatures, and then you have a cancel effect for 1 more. And blue overall is feeling a little shallow. It has 2 commons that really stood out to me, and then 7 uncommons. And then black, we've got Join the Dead, which is target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn at instant speed. At least it has a double pip in black. And then if you have Descend 4, you definitely kill most of the targets in the set. Overall, black is looking similar to blue. It's got about 3 commons and 6 uncommons that really caught my attention. And then we've got good old Abrade has returned for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And this one's great, right? You deal 3 damage to target creature at instant speed for 1 and a red, or you destroy target artifact. And there is a lot of artifacts in all 5 colors. There, at common and uncommon, there are interesting artifacts that do things when they enter the battlefield, and then they can be used for fodder later. And there's just some good targets to destroy with the second mode of Abrade as well. As far as the overall color goes, I found red to be pretty decent. Similarly is also kind of shallow, just because of the commons, right? So there were 3 commons that really stood out to me and 7 uncommons. And so you can see so far that like white is clearly ahead, or is at least the deepest, right? And then the other colors are all relatively similar, with most of the weight being in the uncommons. And oops, I put this one out of order, but because there's a lot of synergies around Graveyard, both for Descend as well as for crafting. Yeah, you can use your cards in your graveyard to craft. Since both of these things are happening, I think that this is going to be a pretty key common in colorless. I meant to put this one after green, so apologies. But so this is, a 3/4 for 4 is not fantastic, but whenever it attacks, it exiles target card from an opponent's graveyard. So if your opponent is trying to get to Descend 4, Descend 8, being able to attack your opponent's graveyard and get the useful crafting materials out and everything, like, I think it's going to be really good, at least against certain archetypes. So keep your eyes out for this one. I think it is going to be a pretty good common. And then for green, they've finally gone and flipped the script and put the bite spell at common and the fight spell at uncommon. But this one allows you to target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. That's what I mean by bite. It doesn't actually have to deal be in combat with the target. And so this one kind of is like a clear shot. I think was the name of it. But pretty good for common removal in green. And then green itself has 4 commons, so slightly deeper, but not really that much more. And then 6 uncommons that caught my attention. So really it feels like the 4 color pairs are relatively close. I don't think that there's any clear winners other than white. I think white stands out to me as slightly better than the other colors. And it might just be preference, though, too. So I don't want to decide for you, but I think I'll be leaning towards white in the beginning of the set. So that's it for my top commons, and now let's get into the archetypes, which is my favorite part of any of these set draft reviews. So each color pair gets a uncommon signpost, generally, to kind of clue us into what the archetype is all about. So first up in Azorius or white-blue, we have Master's Guide Mural, which is an artifact for 5 mana that creates a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token each time that it enters the battlefield, so you can blink this artifact or bounce it to your hand and play it again to trigger another 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token entering the battlefield. And then you can pay 4 colorless, a double pip in white, and a blue 7 and sacrifice an artifact in addition to exiling this to craft it into Master's Manufactory. And this is an artifact that taps to create a 4/4 white and blue golem, but only if another artifact or it entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So Azorius is looking like the craft and artifact deck to me. I think that you'll want to look for creatures with high toughness. White and blue both have a common 2/4 for 3, and both colors have a 1/4 for 2 at uncommon, which will be very helpful to help you survive until you can outvalue your opponent through crafting and getting additional value from your graveyard. Or alternatively, you can try to win through the air while you gum up the ground, since you have a fair amount of cheap flyers available in white and blue. Demir, or blue-black, got Ukenbach the Great Mistake, a 6/4 Vigilance Menace with Descend 8 for 5 total mana. And Demir's theme is, the Descend 8, you have 4 blue and a black. Return Ukenbach the Great Mistake from your graveyard to the battlefield with a Finality Counter on it. And so you get a second life at this. And it's pretty decently statted, right? So Demir's theme overall is looking like Descend, and there are only 6 cards that mill at common, so you'll want to take them highly when you can if you are leaning heavily into the Descend archetype, because it's going to take some time to hit Descend 8, and so I'll probably be taking a control approach to the archetype. I am a little bit worried about how this one will play out, because there is some graveyard hate at common, like the colorless common that I showed you. And then we've got for Rakdos, or black-red, we've got Zo-Yo-Wa Lava Tongue, which is a 2/2 Death Touch for 2 with Descended. At the beginning of your instep, if you descended, each opponent must discard a card or sacrifice a permanent or take 3 damage. The best way to trigger Descended is to take advantage of the cards that make you discard, whether they be through rummage, looting, or as a punishment, and try to win the game as quickly as you can. There are a fair number of defensive creatures with large toughness at common, so you'll want to lean into menace and evasion like flying when you can, and try to win before your lack of cards comes back to bite you. Gruul, or red-green, got its Quineth, firstborn of Gishath, and it's a 2/3 haste for 2, and then later you could play it for 4. Pay the 2 colorless, and when you do, target dinosaur you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. And you've got things like, you've got a 4 power uncommon at 3 in red that's a dinosaur. So you might be able to play this out in a pretty idealistic curve, right? And Gruul is all about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were a bit of a flop in Ikoria, and the design team looks like they are making sure that they aren't making that mistake twice. It feels like the most pushed archetype, with overstated creatures available in both red and green. And there's a little bit of a splash over into white, since dinosaurs were Naya in Ikoria, but most of them are within Gruul. Celestia, or green-white, has Kutzil Malamet Exemplar, a 3/3 for 3 that prevents your opponent from casting spells during your turn, and whenever one or more creatures you control with power greater than its base power deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. And since the wording is a bit confusing, to be clear, you only draw 1 card even if multiple creatures connect. Celestia is looking like increasing base power as its archetype, so you'll want to keep your eye out for ways to add +1/+1 counters, or maybe equipment, since it seems like this archetype isn't particularly well defined or supported. Orsov, or white-black, got Bartolome del Presidio, a 2/1 for 2 that gets a +1/+1 counter every time you sacrifice another creature or artifact. Notably, you can do this at instant speed and as many times as you would like. Orthov's theme is sacrifice, and there are plenty of cards that create artifact tokens or are multiple artifacts in one card that you can use quite well for sacrifice fodder. Izzet, or blue-red, got Captain Storm, Cosmium Raider, a 2/2 for 2 that whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. Izzet's theme looks like pirates. A lot of the pirates are creating like treasure tokens, or coming in with map tokens, other artifacts that are coming along with these creatures that are generally focused on early pressure. So the majority of the pirates are contained within blue-red. with a single common pirate in black as a nod to Grixis pirates from Ikoria. I think it is looking best as a tempo-based strategy, so keep your eyes out for cheap ways to bounce and disrupt your opponent's defenses, as well as creatures with flying or menace, since there are some problematic blockers out there. There's also some room to splash in this archetype because of treasure tokens, and I do think that white in particular is kind of looking like it has at least your best artifact synergies. Golgari or black-green got Akawali, the Seething Tower, a 3/3 for 3 with Descend 4 when it becomes a 5/5 with Trample, and then Descend 8 where it becomes a 7/7 Trampler that can't be blocked by more than one creature. So Golgari looks like Descend as well, but keep in mind that most of the self-mill is in blue-black. So green only got one common, the Mineshaft Spider. So if you're leaning heavily into the Descend mechanic, you may have to value the black self-mill quite highly. Boros or red-white got Caparati or Caparocti Sunborn, a 4/4 for 4 that whenever it attacks, you may tap 2 untapped artifacts and/or creatures you control. If you do, discover 3. Boros' theme is looking like Discover, and the majority of commons and uncommons that trigger Discover are in red-white. I'm not 100% sold on Discover yet. It will depend a little bit on how you build your deck, but I think it looks best when you are playing creatures that discover into other creatures with a board flood strategy, which are mostly at uncommon. And then Simic or green-blue has Nikenzil, Current Conductor, a 2/3 for 2 that whenever a creature you control explores and finds a land, you can put that land into play tapped. And whenever a creature you control explores a non-land, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So Simic's theme is looking like Explore. It's hard to say how similar this is going to be to the Simic Scry deck in Lord of the Rings, since that needed a critical amount of Scry triggers to really shine. And I worry that this might be in the same category where you need a lot of the Explore cards to make this really shine. But we will see. And that's it for the archetypes. So now we've got some options for splashing. And so Captivating Cave is similar to the... I'm blanking on the name. The Crystal Grotto that we've seen before, right? It allows you to splash, but it makes all of your splashes cost more. So the cheaper that you're looking to splash, it worked really well in the last set, Wilds of Eldraine, because of the cheap adventures that you could play off color, while still just mainly being in one color. So it's hard to say if this is going to be a good set for the Captivating Cave, but it is one of the few ways to get +1/+1 counters on, which could be good for Celestia. So the other one that comes to mind is our good old the cutest card of the set, which is Poison Dart Frog. And Poison Dart Frog is a 1/1 reach that can tap to add 1 mana of any color, so it's not just a ramper, it's also a fixer. And it has tap 2 colorless. Poison Dart Frog gains Death Touch until end of turn. So this one is going to be your like bread and butter for splashing and playing multiple colors. So I think if green is probably looking like the best way to do it outside of treasure tokens. And then we've also got a colorless mana rock. Most sets have a 3-cost mana rock that taps for any color. And this one comes with a craft option that if you pay if you craft, you pay 5 colorless, sacrifice as many things as you want, and it flips into the Sunbird Effigy, which is a star flying vigilance haste with power and toughness equal to the number of colors among the exiled cards used to craft it. So if you're going to do the 5-color nonsense thing, then you get some interesting payoffs for this, because a 5/5 flying vigilance haste is pretty good. And then you can tap for each color among the exiled cards used to craft this, add 1 mana of that color. So it still remains as a fixture. And every single Color got a hidden land type, which is a cave. There are a couple of cards in the set that synergize off of how many caves that you have, but I think for the most part, you're going to need too many caves to really make this make it work as an archetype. And but they're tap lands. They tap for the color, and then they all have the same ability, which is colorless. And then whatever color they are, tap, sacrifice the hidden land, and discover 4. Activate only as a sorcery. So as a land, you're able to get additional stuff. You're going to want these a little bit more in your mid-range and your control strategies. It's yet to, it's really hard to determine the pace of a set before anyone's had a chance to play it. So we'll see. These could be good if things look like they're going to bog down. And I think the set might be a little bit slower than what we've been kind of accustomed to in the last previous sets, where 1-drops and 2-drops are really where a lot of the power lies. So since they're bringing in some creatures with higher toughness, we'll see how much that slows things down. And then last but not least, I'd like to give you guys just a little shot of the combat tricks that you should be aware of, at least at common, right? So for white, we've got Acrobatic Leap. Target creature gets +1/+3 and gains flying until end of turn. Untap it. So very similar to the ambush card that we had in green, where it gave us reach instead of flying. But generally, this one tends to be a pretty decent combat trick, and so keep your mind out. Keep your eye out for if your opponent has 1 white untapped. We also have Cosmimian Blast, which is a 1 in a planes for a white instant that deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. I tend to really like these because they work not just when a creature is tapped, right? But whether or not you're attacking or blocking, like eventually that's going to come up in the game. And 4 damage, I haven't done the math yet to see what percentage of commons and uncommons die to 4 damage, but it feels like it's going to be something to at least keep in mind. We've got Family Reunion, which I don't think you have to play around this one too much, because creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. It can matter, but it's not that big of a thing. But if you are targeting something, they can fizzle it. They can give creatures they control hexproof until end of turn. So keep that in mind if they've got white mana untapped. And then the last one is Quicksand Whirlpool, which is a 6-cost instant speed removal that costs 3 less if it targets a tapped creature, and it does exile that target creature. For blue, we've got Brackish Blunder, which returns target creature to its owner's hand for 1 and a blue. If it was tapped, then you get to create a map token. So a little bit of bounce there, just to keep that in mind. And then the one that I already covered, Out of Air, is the 1 counter spell at common, so you'll want to play around that when you're playing against a blue player. Then we've got Relics Roar, which is a 1-cost blue combat trick that turns an artifact or creature into a 4/3 dinosaur. So keep that in mind if they got a map token sitting around there and they've got 1 blue that they're able to create a 4/3 out of nowhere. And then we've got Unlucky Drop. Target artifact or creature's owner puts it on top or bottom of their library. This one is a little bit like, 4 mana untapped isn't going to happen a whole lot, but it is still good to keep the combat tricks in mind. For black, we got Fanatical Offering, which is instant speed removal, but they have to sacrifice an artifact or a creature. So this is more, sorry, I said instant speed removal. This is more to keep in mind when you are targeting your opponent's stuff, because they can do it in response, sacrifice that creature, and draw 2 cards and create a map token. So very similar to, we've seen this before. I'm blanking on the names. I should have wrote down the names. But we've seen this before, and it's kind of annoying to play around. The other one to keep in mind is Join the Dead. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn for 1 and double pit black, and it has Descend 4 that gives it -10/-10. So if you're going to go multiple blocking your opponent's creatures, make sure that they don't have 3 double pit black untapped, right? For the ultimate blowout. And then for red, a Braid. I think we've come up against a Braid enough times that we can kind of just assume this when our opponent has red untapped. To try to play around it, at least try, right? And then Ancestor's Aid is target creature gets +2/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn, and you create a treasure token. So kind of curious to see how well this one will perform. The +1/+0 in first strike hasn't been very impressive, but +2/+0 might be just enough to actually make this one shine. And then we've got Disturbed Slumber in green. Until end of turn, target land you control becomes a 4/4 dinosaur with reach and haste, for 1 and a green. It's still a land. So if your opponent is going to do this, it's kind of risky, right? Because if they do this early on in the game to blow out one of your like 3/3s that 3/4s that are attacking, if you destroy their land, then they're down the land. You know, that's a big deal, right? So this one's kind of risky, but is still one to keep in mind. And then we've got Huatil's Final Strike, which is the fight spell. Or no, sorry, this one's the bite spell. And as target creature you control gets +1/+0, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. So keep that in mind if your opponent has 3 untapped. And then last but not least is Staggering Size. And Staggering Size, target creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of turn. So not really a giant growth, but is, you know, still there. So in summary, my color ranking, I think white is the strongest. The others all look relatively close. I think white looks the strongest simply because it is the deepest color at common and uncommon. I think there's some really cool mechanics. I'm really excited to see how this one plays out. And once again, thank you all for the support. I really appreciate it. Remember to hit like and subscribe for more weekly Magic the Gathering content. I try to post daily videos as best as I can. And tomorrow I will be posting, or maybe breaking it up Saturday and Sunday into 2 videos, because it is like, you know, 9 hours long. But like, if you're interested in my full set review, I will be publishing that out. And thank you so much. Good luck with your games. I hope you're excited as much as I am for the new set coming out, and I wish you luck on getting those trophies, and I will see you all a week after it drops. I will be covering I do a weekly podcast where I cover the specific archetypes or color pairs after I get a little bit of practice with the set. So the set is coming to Arena on November 14th, and pre-release is the weekend before that. So I'll probably be publishing my first video on the 21st with the top performing archetype. So take care, everybody.